Hello, hello. Yeah, welcome. Brigitte Mende? Is that how you say it? If I got it wrong, please correct me. Yes, welcome, welcome. How are you doing? It's nice to have you here. Yeah, and we are back with more tabletop role-playing game design. So, last time we finished the first concept of a game. So finish the first concept as in the rest now needs playtesting, now needs running some numbers, now needs development to see, do things work, are they fun, do they actually play out the way I imagined them to. But that's a little bit beyond the scope um, of this stream, also because I don't have playtesters, right? Hold on, let me see if I can move the canvas a little bit. Okay. Yeah, just Brigitte. It's okay. All right. But yeah, welcome. It's always nice having a new face. Uh, right. I totally forgot that if I put the canvas like this, I will not have access to the color picker. So let me just fix that real quick. So the idea is today to start on a new game, right? There is uh like it's perfectly okay to just try designing new things to get better at it, right? Design is also a skill that you can practice. And it's hard to say it. Well, I guess it depends on what language you're going for, or so like in like German, or I guess Swedish, or so it would be something akin to Brigitte. Uh, I don't actually know how you would say it in English, Bridget. But yes, if I keep mangling your name, do let me know. Uh, I do want to try and get it right. So don't worry about correcting me on this. It is your name after all. That's important. Hold on, the door was just blown open by the wind. Very windy today where I am. Okay, so yeah, designing a new tabletop role playing game. And a lot of the things I talk about here are also applicable to game design in general. Brigitte is okay. All right, I'll keep that in mind. Um, yeah. So a lot of the things I'm saying today is applicable to Mendez. Uh, I mean, I'm fine with saying Brigitte. It's just um, I need to. It's better if I actually know. Um, but all right, I will keep that in mind as well. And also I completely forgot music. Uh, so yeah, so a lot of the things I'm saying here will also be applicable to game design in general. Hold on. And but then some of the things are specific to TTRPGs because they are a special way of playing games in a way that most other games aren't. Okay, let's see. How's the music? All right. If the music is too loud or so, let me know. But yeah, let's just have some in the background. Okay, so um, right. So first things first, ideas and design goals. Right. So when you design anything, you should start out with design goals. And it's always good to establish these in the beginning so that you know what it is you're trying to achieve, that you know what the end product should look like, and that these help guide you through the entire design and development process. Right, you can change them later if things don't work out, of course, but in the beginning, always good to have some idea of what you are trying to produce and what direction you're headed. And the thing with games as well is we play games to have fun. There are as many kinds of fun as there are people. Also, I just realized I didn't react to that melody. Thank you so much for the redeems. I saw them pop up, but my mind was somewhere else. How are you doing, Melody? I'm not ignoring you. Uh, but yeah, thank you for the redeems. Start off the stream with a good stretch. Oh, that was my spine. And I hydrate. All right. Oof. Okay. So, design goals. Um, right. So there are a million different types of fun that people can have, and all of them are valid as long as they don't hurt other people, right? Um, so the goal here is to find out what kind of fun and what kind of an experience you wish to cater to, you wish the game to create when people play it. Right? That's why we have so many different games and so many different genres and all that. So design goals very important, right? They guide. Okay, let me use this for comments. Uh, guide your design, right? And give an idea of the finished product. And I'm saying product here not as in commercial product, but just you are crafting something. All right, so how to find design goals? There are many different ways, many different guides, and as you get better at designing games, um, your skill at finding and defining design goals becomes better as well, right? Like I said, designing is a skill in and of itself that you can learn and practice. But to start out with, and just in general, right? You can use questionnaires basically, right? So sets of questions that you answer, and in answering these, you define various aspects of your design where you want to go. And in RPG design, especially, there is something called the Big Three, which is a set of 3 questions that will help you get some very high level ideas down first, right? They don't go too much into specifics, but that is not the goal right now. And if you search for RPG design Big Three and such, there are actually 2 sets of 3 questions that were independently defined by 2 different people. And because both of them are a set of 3 questions, they were both called the Big Three. And they were both created roughly the same time, right? Back in late 90s, early 2000s, where the internet wasn't that prolific yet. So both of them managed to catch on before they knew of each other, essentially. And suddenly you had 2 sets of Big Three. But that's okay. We can combine them into a Big Five, right? Big Five because they share this first question. And then you just combine them together into 5 questions, and they will help you with defining some design goals for your RPG. So let's just go through them and see what kind of answers we find. I do have an rough idea of what kind of a game I wish to start designing today. So let's just go through it. So the first question is, what is the game about? Hey, Jojo, hi. Long time no see. How are you doing? Nice to have you here. What is the right? Extremely high level. This is your elevator pitch, right? Uh, doing well. Hope you can have a wonderful stream. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's good to hear that you're doing well. Sounds really interesting. Well, then I hope it will actually be interesting for you, and that you might, I don't know, learn a thing or two, because that would be wonderful. Um, but yeah, so the most high level question, essentially, what is the game about? Um, so what I wish to start today, and I'll try to cut down on the jargon, because what I'm trying to design is a firmly established genre within RPGs. But I'll try and cut down on the jargon. So a low-powered fantasy adventure game where PCs explore wilderness, delve dungeons. And then the world is dangerous. So cleverness trumps brute force. There. For those in the know, this is basically OSR, old school Renaissance, right? There's also a parallel movement called the New School Renaissance. I haven't quite figured out how that is different. Um, I've read some articles trying to define that, but it's very new. In any case, it's called Old School Renaissance because the old school Dungeons and Dragons, right? The original game from the 70s and early 80s played like this. You had PCs who were average people who just went into a dungeon with a rusty chainmail and a sword. Have a great day or night. Bye, guys. Okay. Thank you for dropping by. And you too have a great, wherever you are, a great time zone. Um, right. So this is the original Dungeons and Dragons back in the 70s and early 80s played like this, where yeah, the player characters were uh average people, right? Not high powered superheroes, more akin to what they are today. And you basically went into dungeons to get money, right? And you were, thanks for the stream. Yeah, thank you for being here. Uh, and they were like, the dungeon itself was very deadly, right? The monsters in it were very deadly, and straight up fighting monsters would very likely lead to the death of the entire party. Like, even a bunch of goblins or a handful of orcs or even skeletons or whatever, like monsters that we think of nowadays as low level and easy in Dungeons and Dragons and related games, um back then were really really deadly because you only had, like, I don't know, 6 hit points or something, and a single short sword attack could deal 6 hit points on a lucky roll, and then you die in one hit. That's it, right? So you did not want to rush into every encounter, or if you see a monster, you don't want to rush in and fight because that means you'll die, most likely, more often than not. And so what the game relied on was cleverness, right? So that the player characters and also the players have to use their environment, whatever they happen to bring, whatever they happen to find, and so on, to evade the monsters or maybe talk to them, bribe them, whatever, right? Sneak past them, etc., etc. Because uh, that way they would manage to stay alive and grab all the treasure. And back then as well, you gain experience for treasure that you find, not for monsters that you kill. Right? Every 1 gold piece that you bring back to town equals 1 point of experience. So that was very, very much the motivation of not fighting and just grabbing the treasure and running. And that kind of gameplay, as D&D evolved over the years, that changed. The big break was with 3rd edition, where PCs would be able to get so much power later on that they became superheroes, essentially. And then 4th edition made that pretty explicit. Yes, the PCs are special, right? And start off with a whole bunch of powerful abilities and lots of hit points, and they're meant to just go through dungeons and just destroy everything. And 5th edition basically carried on with that. Right, it includes a lot of things like very complex death rules of, oh, if you hit 0 hit points, you don't actually die, you still get this and that many chances, blah blah, and so on. And um and it's basically to make sure that the PCs remain special, remain superheroes. And there has been a revival of the old school type of playing that originated in original D&D, right? OD&D from the 70s. And that is the old school Renaissance. So yeah, this is an OSR adjacent game, right? That I'm hoping to design today. Right. So high lethality if the players choose to run in and just fight everything they see. And where they have to use cleverness, where they have to use the things they've brought. And they have to feel the danger of the wilderness and the dungeon and so on. So, question 2. That sounds cool. I'm glad. There are a lot of OSR games. Like, it is one of the biggest movements in the RPG design. And there are many, many big names, both in designers and in games. So what I'm doing here is nothing new. It's probably all been thought of before in various games. So if you just search OSR RPGs, you will find dozens, if not hundreds, right? And there's adventures for it. There's digital magazines for it. Everything. So there's a lot going on. All right, but I wanted to create one that I would really enjoy playing, possibly. And that does add some other things that I've seen in some other games that I think are cool mechanics to include. All right, so question number 2 is the two questions number 2 from the 2 sets of big 3. Right. So we can split them into like 2A, 2B. 2A is, I think, a very, very valuable question because when what I've seen from newbie designers, and I myself was a newbie designer once, right? Uh, when designing games, is they just they usually take a game they already know and just adapt it slightly, right? As like, oh, I want to change this, and then they design that way, and that's okay. That is a good way to get some first design experience. But then if they want to design a completely new game, they don't know what exactly to go for, right? They don't see the connection between rules and gameplay too much. And this is what this question does, right? So, oh, where's my cursor? Here. So the first question is, what is the game about? The second question is, how is the game about that? Right? So the game is about this. And then you have to ask, well, okay, but how? How, if I read the rules, if I look at the mechanics and such, how does this first design goal, the elevator pitch, how is that actually implemented into the game? Right? So there are a bunch of systems I can do. So basically, um, disincentivize combat, right? So you don't want the players to do combat by disincentivizing them in various ways. By not giving them some sort of reward for it, right? Nowadays, in many, many RPGs, if you defeat a monster, you gain experience. So players will seek out combat. They will grind, right? They will just run around somewhere and just keep fighting monsters because that's directly how they become stronger. And if you don't give that reward, if you don't give an XP reward, they are much less likely to do so, right? So no direct mechanical reward. And lethal / dangerous, right? So make it least lethal / dangerous. Going into combat is an excellent way to get yourself killed. You don't want that, right? Combat is a last resort. And then have and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not reward player ingenuity, but create avenues for player ingenuity. I will explain what that means in a second. And have rigid systems. So what I also want in there is attrition, right? Attrition meaning you have some sort of resource or resources that run out, be that HP or consumable items or magic points. Torches is a big one in many OSR games and so on. essentially going into a dungeon and adventuring wears you down in several ways, and that makes the dungeon dangerous. There is an ad going to start soon, so I will hold off on adding too much more right now until the ads are over, and I will think about if there's anything I'm missing. This is really just a bullet point list at this point. Um, so thinking. Mm, yeah, there's one more thing I can add. So I'll just write this down, and if the ad plays, I'll explain it later, afterwards. All right, there's the ad. Oh no, my sound alert didn't play. Uh-oh. Don't tell me it's because I have to update. Welp, at running. Huh, it's supposed to play a sound alert when an at runs so that I know. But okay. All right. Um okay. So, let's see. Okay, Twitch is telling me the ad break is over. Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, so I added a last point, robust systems for exploration and delving. All right, so what does all of this mean? So disincentivizing combat. So if I say my poor English, no ads for you. Oh, then I guess you were lucky. I do have an ad manager set up to run them every half hour though, so that we don't get any pre-roll ads, right? I'd much rather have the ads timed in a way so that I can pause my content. It probably makes it easier for everyone. And no, it's all fine. You're good. Um, so disincentivizing combat, pretty easy, right? You don't want to reward players for entering combat, and you want to make combat exceedingly dangerous or even lethal, so they think 5 times before drawing their weapons and charging in, right? And if they do have to make combat, oh my god, what was that? If they do have to fight, enter combat, um, that they try to stack the deck as much in their favor as possible, right? Ambushing, traps, flanking, whatever you can find, right? To make sure that they have the upper hand more often than not. Attrition also relatively easy, right? You have hit points or something that slowly counts down, and then you start the dungeon crawl with 10 hit points, and then as you go in, you're like, oh no, I'm only at 3. Do I continue, or do we rest, or do we leave, right? Or you start the dungeon with 5 torches, and then someone's like, oh, we only have 1 torch left. Ooh, we might not have enough light to get out of this dungeon, right? Or food, or medicine, or whatever, potions, other stat-based resources, mana points, anything, right? Um, that slowly count down and that cannot be replenished easily. That's also a big issue um, that the next point will tie into. But a lot of tips, DMing tips that I see on YouTube and such for running D&D and other role-playing games, especially D&D though, because that is endemic, is the problem of the long rest. So basically, it is too easy for groups to take long rests, and because a long rest fully heals you and recovers all of your expended things, all spell slots, all hit points, all ability uses, everything, the players actually are very much incentivized to rest as often as possible. Because as the game is written, and as any tips, dungeon master tips, and game running tips, and so as they mention or fail to mention, rather, there is no downside to resting. Resting carries no negative consequences. So, player characters, and I've seen DMs or players sometimes complain about this quite a bit. It's like, oh, my party will fight one fight, right? And then rest, long rest for 8 hours, and then get into the next fight, and then long rest for 8 hours, and so on. So in game time, clearing a dungeon will take 2 weeks because they rest after every single fight. And that is obviously not how the game pacing was intended. But there is nothing in the game that prevents this, right? In original Dungeons and Dragons, there very much was. Right. First off, you don't heal fully when you rest, so the incentive for resting is much much smaller. And also, the dungeon is dangerous. If you're resting in a dungeon, you pass several hours. Here's the thing: every 10 minutes, the dungeon master checks if you get a random encounter. Every 10 minutes. So for every hour that passes, you get 6 checks. If you rest for 8 hours, that is 48 checks. Right? I doubt GMs would roll 48 times. They might have a different table that kind of approximates those values, right? You roll and then you have like a percentage, you roll for every hour or something. But if you rest for 8 hours, and typically it's a 1 in 6 chance for every check, right? You roll a 6-sided die, and on a 1, the party encounters a random encounter, a wandering monster, and it can be scaled up if the dungeon is more dangerous, right? 2 in 6 or 3 in 6, for example. And so if you rest for 8 hours, the GM effectively gets to roll 48 times to see if they get a 1. And if every time they get a 1, you fight. Or you get disturbed by a monster at the very least, right? So resting in a dungeon is extremely dangerous. So there are very clear negative consequences to resting in a dungeon. So low reward, high danger means players only do it if they absolutely have to, right? If they say, oh, if anything goes wrong, I will die, right? Then they say, okay, we should probably rest. And that's part of the robust systems for exploration and delving. So let me explain that right now. And this is, I think, a big, big issue, and this is where I will actually say D&D, modern D&D, is doing many dungeon masters and games and such a big disservice by having removed these rules. In original Dungeons and Dragons, you had clear rules on how to delve in a dungeon. Just like how combat was split into turns, right? And every turn, every character gets an action, right? They can attack someone, or they can cast a spell, or they can drink a potion, or whatever, right? Um, so was the dungeon delve split into turns. In fact, you had different words. You had combat rounds and dungeon turns. Right? They use these two words to differentiate that very clearly. So a dungeon turn is 10 minutes of time, and it was very well defined, similarly defined like in combat, what you could do in a dungeon turn. You could search a certain amount of area. You could um, try to disarm a trap, or any encounter with anyone, right? Either combat or talking or something would take roughly those 10 minutes, right? Um, and and so you had, and also how far you can travel in a dungeon turn, right? Is defined, and so the dungeon delve was very clearly split into, okay, now we're at this turn. Everyone declare your actions. It's like, okay, I will search the bookcases here in this room, right? That's gonna take me my turn. And someone else is, there's a chest. I will check the chest for traps. Okay, that's gonna take my turn. And someone else is like, oh, I'm kind of wounded. Let me bandage myself. Okay, that's gonna take your turn. And then you do these things. You do the checks, and you resolve whatever the actions were doing. And then at the end, you check for any depletion of resources, right? So torches, for example, would last 1 hour, 6 turns. So when someone has a torch, you would count down, okay, so you lit this torch like 3 turns ago, now you spent another turn, there are 2 turns left on this torch, and then it goes out and it's gone. Right? So players had a very, very clear time limit simply by how many torches they had. Right? Because a dungeon is dark. And if you're caught in the dark, you are basically dead. Right? So then players have to say, okay, we've been in here for 2 hours, in this dungeon for 2 hours. We still need to go out, and we only have 2 torches left. Probably a good idea to start heading back now, right? Things like that. And that was dungeon delving. So it was very clear how much time passes in a dungeon, what players can do or characters can do in that time, counting down resources, or like recharging resources as well. Like if you bandage yourself, or if you, I don't know, some classes or games might have like, oh, if you meditate for a dungeon turn, you will regain 1d6 magic points or whatever, right? But that spends a turn. And there was a very robust system for delving into dungeon that made the entire thing structured and gave the players very meaningful choices, right? So, and they could actually feel the danger of the dungeon. They could feel like, oof, going deeper and deeper and deeper into a dungeon is really dangerous and really oppressive. And holy heck, we really don't want to be here. We haven't found a lot of gold yet. If we leave now, not, is it worth it? Is it worth going in one more room, or just leaving with whatever we found now? So that's very powerful choices that you give the players. Similarly for wilderness exploration and such, where hex crawling is a big one, to give the players meaningful choices, clear choices where they know, oh, we can do this or we can do that, and we know exactly if we do this, these are the positive and negative consequences. If we do this, these are the positive and negative consequences, and then they can make a meaningful choice between those two. So that's also something I want in the game. And these existed back in original Dungeons and Dragons, and then by third edition, they were gone. Not a single book in third edition mentioned these things, right? And that's where you get a lot of frustration when people run dungeons because they don't know how to make a dungeon dangerous. They don't know how to make players really buy into the game. They don't know how to give the players meaningful choices, how to cut down on things like the constant resting and so on and so forth, right? All because there is no system to impose restrictions which then give players meaningful choices. So yes, I will say that was a horrible design decision to get rid of gameplay. All right. Okay. I'm glad you agree. So that is definitely something to put in. And these systems already exist, right? Original Dungeons and Dragons had them. A lot of OSR games take these systems and either adapt them to their game or improve on them or change them or so on. So a lot of that already exists out there, right? Oof. Okay. Last point here, create avenues for player ingenuity. What does that mean? So there is a spectrum in RPGs. That was not the color I wanted here. There is a spectrum in RPGs. Was a horrible line. There we go. And that is player creativity on on one side and stat checking on the other, right? So what this means is if you have a stat for something in a game, it is very, very easy for players to just default to checking the stat, right? Usually by rolling a die or something, and then seeing if the action succeeds or not. And on the other hand, on the other extreme, if you don't have a stat for something, the player needs to think through the situation and use various tools at hand and try to solve the problem like a person in the situation, right? So, like searching for traps is a very common example here. How stat checking would work is you have some sort of search skill, maybe, or like a find trap skill, or perception, or whatever. Right? The exact name is unimportant. And the player looks at, I don't know, a room or a hallway and goes, okay, I want to search for traps. And in a stat checking game, you just roll the perception or the search check, and then you pass or fail, and then the GM just goes, okay, you find a trap here. Or, no, you don't find any traps. Hi, Yaki. Nice to see you here. How are you doing? Right, so that's the stat checking side. And the other side of it is if there is no oh my god, search skill or perception stat or anything like that, then the player has to actually try and find a trap. Right? So for example, that is why the 10-foot pole in D&D is such a meme. Right? Why the heck do I need a 10-foot pole? Well, if you're walking down a hallway, you can take that 10-foot pole and you can poke at the walls and the floor and the ceiling in front of you as you go and find traps that way. Right? This is why you bring a 10-foot pole into a dungeon to help search for traps, because if there are any pit traps or other like stones that are pressure plates or a loose ceiling or whatever, right? You poke at it with your stick, your long stick, and you have a chance of finding them. And that is the player creativity side of things. Now, this is a spectrum, right? So you can be somewhere in the middle, and the one game can have both. Some things can be stat checked, right? Combat, for example, is very often just stat checking, and other things are player creativity. And one final thing, even if there is a stat for something, people, depending on the gameplay situation, people often ignore the stat in favor of player creativity. Hey yo, congrats on being first. And thank you for the redeems. Okay, all of my redeems are broken. What the heck? All of my redeems are broken. Okay, let me see if I have to update StreamerBot or something. Is there a check for updates? Maybe I have to update StreamerBot. This, man. But yeah, thank you for all of those. I will hydrate and stretch while StreamerBot updates, and then I can hopefully just restart it and it'll be fine. But yeah, as I was saying, depending on the gameplay situation, right? So one example where this often happens is social situations. You hear this is a big discussion. Even though D&D has a couple of stats, and I'm using the word stat for anything player value, for social situations, people prefer to use player creativity instead very often, right? And this comes back to there not being robust systems, right? The stats for social situations in D&D are so vague that they are either completely useless or too powerful, or just strange to use. And because they are so vague and undefined, it's kind of like not having a stat at all. Okay, installing the new update, restarting. Please. StreamerBot. It's always horrible timing as well. It's like, oh, I want to start the stream and then load up StreamerBot. It's like, oh, surprise, there's an update. So, okay. Well, let's hope that fixed it. No, this is just tabletop. I'm not a programmer or a coder in any way. Maybe one day, like I do have ambitions of creating a video game or video games, like tabletop storytelling ish. Like mainly because I look at games like I know what kind of game I like, and I haven't been able to find that kind of game yet. Right? So the reason I designed these games is because they are games I would want to play. Hold on, I need to go grab a fan real quick. It is surprisingly hot. It's almost December, and we're still sitting here in warm weather. It's But yeah, so mainly these ideas are mainly just tabletop ideas right now, and like because this is a series and I plan on making multiple games in this series, right? Just to demonstrate how the design process works for tabletop RPGs. Not all of these are going to be made into full games, right? I doubt, like, maybe I will take one of these ideas that I really like and try to develop it further. Um, but this is more that I just have an excuse of practicing design and showing design and showing others how RPG design might work. Right? Because I've seen a lot of people designing games, which is amazing, right? Design is a very fun hobby. Um, and I've been doing it for a quarter century, so maybe I can chip in and teach a thing or two and make people more happy with their designs as they learn more about it. So, yeah. So essentially, this whole thing I was talking about, this spectrum of player creativity on the one side, right? And stat checking on the other side. So, video games, for example, use a lot of stat checking. Sounds really nice. Thank you. Right, in video games, a lot of things are all just stat checking. Um, do you manage to sneak past a guard? That's stat checking. Do you manage to find a trap? That's stat checking. Do you manage to pick the lock? Stat check. Do you manage to hit something? Stat check. Do you manage to persuade someone? Stat check, right? Because in video games, it's very difficult to have this kind of collaborative storytelling, conversation, and negotiation going on, right? You can't really talk to your computer. That's that they're not sophisticated enough, right? Um, so you need to substitute all of that with stats. Um, whereas you can, if you're just playing completely freeform, you can have player creativity and a lot of improv shows, for instance, right? Improv theater, or more things like Whose Line Is It Anyway, where they try to play games that you can quote unquote win in a certain way, right? You can't really win anything, it's all for fun. But you know, they do have a certain goal they are trying to work to. Um, and they are given complete freedom. There are no stats in things like that, right? So it's like, oh, here's a strange prop. Make jokes with that prop, right? And or here is a certain scene that you should be acting out, or a certain situation that you need to act out, or a certain type of song you need to sing. Do it, and then they just use their ingenuity and their training and improv to solve this problem, basically, right? Um, and similarly, in pure storytelling games, you can do that, right? You can just all have it in conversation, all have it in you negotiate, or someone says, all right, I have authority for right now because I'm holding the storytelling stone, or what have you, right? And then you just tell the story together, and that's all player creativity. Okay, long story short, the point here is if I want to create avenues for player ingenuity, I need to err more on this side of this spectrum, right? I don't want to err on the side of stat checking. I want to err more on the side of player creativity. Yes. So that's what this means. Um, and I'm seeing the ad is going to pop up soon, but let me just write down question 2B for now. Question 2B is relatively easy for most people to answer, because that is what they have in their mind when they look at a game, when they look at designing a TTRPG, and what that is. What do the characters do? Right. So most people, when they design their own TTRPGs or adapt an existing game to their own wishes. This is what they have in mind. What do the characters do in the game, right? Maybe the characters are demigods and they fight epic monsters, right? Mythical creatures, okay. Or maybe it's Dungeons and Dragons with guns and laser pistols and all of that technology. It's like, okay, so the characters do the same things in D&D, but this time with advanced technology. Right. So that's kind of the easiest question for people to grasp. Because that is what they typically have in mind when they set out to design something. But it's still good to make this clear, to make this explicit, right? All right, hold on. Let me get more space.
In enduring, grow strong.
Okay, what do the... There. Oops. Let me just write this in this color over here. There we go. And I will let the ad play out for anyone who is currently trapped in one. I get that ads are annoying, but I can't change it. If you stream on Twitch and you are affiliate, you get ads. That's just Twitch. So I'd much rather have them on a fixed schedule that I can make sure I pause my content. Hey, Reconsist. Morning. Yeah, hi. How are you doing? It's nice to see you here. Yeah. All right, drink some more. I have some tea still, some good Taiwanese tea. From last night that I have in a thermos bottle. And it's still warm. Okay. Ads seem to be over, so welcome back, everyone. All right, so like I said, this question is relatively easy for people to answer because this is the first big thing they envision when they want to design a game. Doubting the necessity of my existence? Hey, I'm happy you're here, okay? So don't doubt it. No, but I get you. I do hope you'll manage to feel better, and maybe, yeah, maybe hanging out here will help a little bit. Hopefully, right? But yeah, do do uh do take care of yourself, whatever it needs. Um, right. So in this game, what do the characters do? Well, the characters uh go out on adventures and look for. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. In OD&D, the motivation was very, very simple. You look for treasure, right? Because treasure is nice, right? Treasure is shiny, and treasure makes you more powerful. Like, directly, getting gold means you get XP, and getting gold means you can spend it on better equipment, on buying spells, etc., etc. And back in the days when OD&D was just birthed, that was good enough, right? Because it's a completely new style of game. People was just like, you know what? Let's just get some people together and play some looters and just go out. Food time? All right. I wish you a very good fooding, Yaki. Good luck on the stream and game planning. Thank you, and thank you for dropping by and being here, and for hanging out a bit. I wish you good a bone apple tea. Um. So yeah, the motivation was pretty simple. You didn't need complex characters. You just went, okay, we're just going out to get gold. Done. That could still be something, but I don't want that to be the main driving force. So, yes, the characters go out on adventures. But why? I haven't thought about this yet. I haven't thought about this one yet. Mm, like I could do let's see. So there are some games that do go a bit more complex into the whole character personality and motivation deal. Are like, okay, you go out to fulfill your personal drive or your personal motivation, right? So every character has a personal motivation of some sort. Um, and then so something like, I don't know, recover a family heirloom or get vengeance on for my village. They're going to be narrative story, more free exploration. So this one is more on the exploration side of things. So I am um the previous game I made was very heavy on the narrative story, right? It's very fixed, very focused on like one type of story, right? Eldritch investigation and losing your humanity, and then you would tell these kind of stories. But this game is going to go the opposite way, and it's more, well, you go out and you explore the wilderness, you delve into dungeons, and something like, why do you do this? I do want to try and include something. Um, I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm going to leave this open. Maybe have a personal goal. Oops, goal? Question mark. There are games that do this. They're mainly by Luke Crane, I think is his name. Yeah, Luke Crane. Burning Wheel is a very big one. And another similar game, Torchbearer. Torchbearer is very much an OSR game, right? So this whole low-powered fantasy and the world is dangerous and deadly, blah, all of this good stuff. But the players have personal motivations. Not the players, the characters have personal motivations to go out, some reason to actually brave the dangers, right? So essentially, I'm not 100% sure yet, but as I design, I might find something that fits, right? PCs need a reason to brave dangers, right? Because normal people don't just randomly decide to put their life on the line um and go into a dangerous dungeon where they might just die in a dark hole, right? That's not something normal people do, right? heck, stealing things or begging in the streets or finding work as a lumberjack or cattle driver or whatever is better than going into a dark hole into the ground and never coming back out, right? So there needs to be a reason for the characters to do this thing, to do this really stupid, dangerous thing, effectively, right? So I need to find something, but maybe as I develop these ideas more, something will come to me. But this is a hole I know I need to fill at some point. But that's okay. I don't need to have all the answers now. Um, let's move on to the third set of questions. Right. So, third set of questions again, A and B. This one, the third set of questions, I really like because when you're a newbie designer, you don't think about this typically. And again, I know this because I was a newbie designer back in the day, and I've seen many people design like their first games. I've watched like some people stream them, some people make videos, some people describe their first ideas for a game on forums or whatever, and then you read through them and then you realize what they were thinking of when they designed them. And the third set of questions makes you look at an RPG that you are designing in a way that many newbie designers don't think about an RPG. Because when you are a player or a dungeon master or game master as well, you don't really make this connection. You don't have to, right? Nothing in the game is really there to have you make the connection. You just play the game. But this third set of questions is what puts the game into role-playing game. So let's look at the first question. What kinds of the exact word is, I don't know, behaviors or actions does the game incentivize? Right? And the point will be even clearer when we get to question 3B. So, what kinds of behaviors does the game incentivize? You're a non-human creature in a human bard form, heavily obsessed of humans' adventure stories. Look for trails of adventures left in the wild and form a story. Happen there, you feed on the stories you construct. Ooh. Oh, okay. Is that from a generator? That looks very much like from a generator, but if not, that no? Okay. Just came up. Oh, wow. Nice, nice. Non-human creature in human art form, heavily obsessed of human adventure stories. Look for trails of adventures left in the wild and form the story happened there. You feed on the stories to construct. That is an absolutely amazing prompt. I have to say that is holy heck genius. Um, it is so good, however, that it requires its own game. This I I can see if this can be fit into a game like that, but I am afraid because this prompt is really really good. Like holy heck, wow. Coming up with that is genius. Um, but the prompt is so powerful, I don't want to dilute it. If that makes sense. So if I want to design a game with that, and I do think now that I do want to design a game with that because that is really good. Um, it deserves a game completely centered around this one prompt. Right. That's not quite what I had in mind with this game. This game is more broad, more just uh going out on adventures, more like the older D&D of like sandbox everything game in a way. Not a true everything game, but like way more freeform in the types of activities you can do. Um, but that prompt deserves its own game. That prompt is yeah, I will hold on. I will copy this because I don't want to lose that. And it deserves to have its own game built around that. I already have ideas of how this can be made. Like because then you want mechanics that specifically feed into this particular premise, right? So TTRPG prompt reconsist. Uh, okay, right. Um, okay, but yeah, that might be the next game I attempt to design. Um, thank you very much for that. That is really cool. Uh, but yeah, it. I think it's so special that you should really have an entire game centered just around that. Okay, back to this question. What kinds of behaviors does the game incentivize? So it first off, I already wrote it disincentivizes combat, right? So not rushing into combat or not rushing into danger in general. Right? Um and planning your trips. I'm just gonna use the word trip here, right? Trip into the wilderness and into a dungeon. It sounds like a vacation, but you know you have to pack accordingly. You have to do research, and you have to prepare so that you don't die out there. Um, planning your trips and resource management. I love resource management. I think it's a criminally underutilized play space in a lot of RPGs. Uh, resource management and exploration. Maybe exploration will directly grant some sort of reward, either through a connection here with a personal goal, or just if you explore things, you gain XP or something, right? Um, so that's the kind of things that the game incentivizes. Okay, and question 3B. This is the big one. This is the one where if you're a newbie designer, generally, you look at this question and go, huh? Right? What? Because you don't really think about role playing games like that. And the question is, what do the players do? Right? And I've seen this reaction many, many, many times on the forums back in like the early 2000s when I first learned design. And I had that reaction as well when I first read these questions. Right? It's like, I've already written an answer to this, right? It's right here. What do the characters do, right? But no. what do the characters do and what do the players do are two completely different things. What do the characters do is the role playing. Right? That's the role playing part of RPG. And this is the game part of RPG. Gonna have lunch. Hope you all can have fun. Have really amazing ideas. Thank you, and thank you for being here and hanging out a bit. And I wish you a very very good lunch. Was nice seeing you again. Um, right. So you have role playing. Right. What do the characters do? This is inside the narrative, inside the setting and the story. This is what is happening in everyone's head. The shared storytelling part. But you have to also realize that this shared storytelling is done by a bunch of real people sitting around a table or sitting in front of their computers connected to each other, right? Um, and playing a game. And they need to have some sort of fun, right? So that's what this question aims to find out. Right? So this is the shared narrative inside the game, and this is the actual table actions, right? The mechanical decisions, the interesting choices and such that you make as someone, as a real human sitting at the table, and not as, I don't know, Bob the Barbarian or some Simon the Sorcerer or someone in the story, right? Those are two completely different things. So what do the players do? The players, and we've kind of answered that already up here, right? And that's the benefit of using both sets of these big three together. A lot of these answers feed into each other. So the players um, try to use environment plus tools to cleverly overcome problems, right? Or obstacles is probably a better word. Obstacles, right? And so that includes all of these things, right? Planning your trips, resource management, and all that. And also, maybe it ties into the personal goal thing because, yes, the personal goal is something the character has, but it is something the player defines, right? So, play toward PC's personal goal. And it looks more and more like this is actually going to be a thing now, right? Um, yeah. So they try to craft the narrative and push the narrative in a direction that satisfies or explores and advances the personal goal of the PC or PCs in the group, really, because you can help each other out on the goals. So this is the big three, the two sets of big three. And with these answered, you now have a pretty good idea of what kind of a game you are making, right? So from the vast open space of complete possibility of everything, right? Anything is possible. We have now narrowed it down to quite a concrete game, right? This is now something we can work with. This is a goal that we have. This is now guidelines that we can use for any further decisions we make for the design. And yeah, that's a horrible line. That's even more horrible. Holy heck. Okay. Um, and it narrows the scope of our design. Right. There are a handful of other things that we can think about right now to round this out a little bit. So, other considerations. All right. Other considerations. Okay, so we need the systems, right? Mechanical systems. So we talked about needing systems for exploration and delving. Some other systems might also help. I'm thinking downtime. Downtime is always a really nice system to have, and also criminally underused in big RPGs in general. Not so much in smaller ones. Um, right. But we need a system for exploration. We need a system for dungeon delving. We need a system for downtime. We can have other systems depending on what we want. Like we could have a system for alchemy, for example, right? For crafting. We could have a system for building your own stronghold, for example, if we want that to eventually be something that the players can do, right? But a lot of these mini games, really, that you can have in the game um, for different parts of the game, different aspects, or for different actions. Um, and you can go as small or as big as you want, right? Something like stronghold building and domain management is a very big one. Um, that that is not a core part of many games. Again, original D&D had that as a core part of the game. Once you hit level 9 or 10, your character was given the opportunity to build a stronghold, right? That was hard coded into the rules. At this level, you can get a stronghold and you start getting followers and retainers and all of that. And you start becoming a lord or lady or whatever like ruling ruling noble in a way, right? Ruling person, and you start getting into domain play, and that was in the rules. And even 5e Dungeons and Dragons with their, I don't know if it's their newest, but one of the recent Unearthed Arcanas has a whole section on stronghold building, right? And there are many books, entire books just on stronghold building and such, because it is a very interesting facet, right? So it's like, what do you do with all of that money? Well, you put it into your own stronghold and you hire people and then you have your own base of operations. That's cool. That is something you can see and to grow in the game. Um, there is also an OSR game called Errant that has a mini game for lockpicking. Right, lockpicking is not just a stat check. Right, we're back here. Lockpicking is player creativity and player ingenuity in a way, right? So when you pick a lock, you need to pick different actions: twist, tap, turn, or twist, tap, twist, or tap, turn, twist, or whatever. And then, depending on the type of lock you're facing, a certain combination will open it. And so, as the player, you can gather, okay, copper locks have twist, tap, turn, iron locks have tap, turn, tap, and so on. And you, as a player, gain knowledge about the world and have a lockpicking mini game like that. That's also possible, right? So you can go as big or as small as you want. And it's certainly more interesting, I guess, than stat checking, right? I pick the log, okay, roll. Oh, I failed. Okay, the log is, you can't open it, done, right? That's not very interesting. So mechanical systems, various mechanical systems and structures for various activities you can do in the game. All right, the ad is going to start soon. I will take this moment to go to the toilet real quick, and then I will be right back. Where's my mouse? Here. So yeah, I will be right back.
Endure. In enduring, grow strong.
Oof, okay, that timing. Right, back. Uh, okay. Where were we? Other considerations. So, uh, exploration, dungeon delving. Let me write this a bit cleaner. Downtime, etc. Right, and these can be created bit by bit. However, there is a way to, like, depending on what you want. Um, I prefer these kinds of systems to run to how do I say this? To clearly be the same game. What do I mean by that? If you look at original Dungeons and Dragons, right, the very very first thing that was ever played back then, it was actually a collection of different games, completely different games. So you had the Dungeons and Dragons game to create your characters and to delve into dungeons and such. But if you got into combat, the rule book literally told you, all right, if you get into combat, you must now unpack this completely different game called Chainmail and then play combat using the rules of Chainmail. Right? And then when you're traveling in the wilderness, The game also tells you, okay, when you're traveling in the wilderness, put aside Dungeons and Dragons and grab this completely different game called Wilderness Adventures, I believe it was called, and then use this game, this completely different game that has nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. It's its own independent thing, right? To play through the wilderness travel. So that is certainly a way you can do it, right? You can have it as a collection of different games. And in many ways, having different systems like this is a collection of games. It's just how obviously are they one single game with ties to one another that influence one another, right? Maybe one system will influence another system or work off the same stats and values and so on. D&D, for example, is a basic task resolution system, and it has a combat minigame that is, for all intents and purposes, a separate game, right? When you get into combat, it's like, okay, now unpack this chapter. I forgot how long it is, but it's something like 20, 30 pages, right? Which is a magazine's worth of rules on combat. And then play this minigame, combat minigame. And then when you're done with combat, you put that thing aside and don't touch it again. And then you come back and play Dungeons and Dragons. Kinda, right? So any mechanical system like this is going to be its own game. And some games really go wild and say, all right, I will craft the perfect system to model every single one of these sub tasks, sub aspects. Right? There's a game called Fantasy Craft that does exactly that. Fantasy Craft is an amazing game to look at just to see what design can do to mimic different subtasks, but it's essentially a collection of dozens of games that have nothing to do with each other. Right? So every time you want to try something new, try a certain action, you have to learn a completely new game. Or you can say, well, I will abstract things to such a degree that they are all similar, right? That they all run on the same basic system, and the only things that differ are the details. Errant, as I mentioned before, does that, right? So you have different structures for turns. You have wilderness turns, you have dungeon turns, you have combat turns, but all of these are turns, and every single turn follows the same basic structure, right? So you can have a list of these are the things that happen in a turn, and these are the things you check for. And when you run a wilderness turn, the details of the results of the checks are like this. When you run dungeon turn, the details are like this. When you run the combat turn, the details are like this. But once you have learned the basic turn structure, you can apply it to all of these situations, right? And both ways are valid, right? It's what do you sacrifice? Do you sacrifice like ease of use, or do you sacrifice what's the word? Not oh, I just had the word in my head. It just flashed by it. Now I forgot it. Do you sacrifice not realism, because it's never realistic, but do you sacrifice accuracy, I guess is the word, right? How accurate something can model a certain task. And if you look at some like and many games try to, like, some games try to be somewhere in the middle. It's difficult to use Dungeons and Dragons as an example here because Dungeons and Dragons only has one system, right? Combat, and that's it. So it's hard to say, oh, compare this system and that system and that system. Inside D&D, so that's a difficult one to use as an example. But several other games I guess ease of use tends to win out, right? Because again, if your game is so complex that people can't get past the rules and can't get past how to play, then they're not going to play it. So same here. I am going to err on the side of abstraction and ease of use and coherence, rather than having every subsystem be as accurate in portraying that specific task. Okay, what else? Uh, I want this to allow for sandbox. Oh my goodness, sandboxy play. So I'm not writing complete sandbox. The term sandbox is uh people don't even know what it means anymore. Um, but to allow for, probably a better term is player driven narrative. So what that means is that um, the players can be given tools or opportunities to drive the narrative in a certain direction, right? In many games and in many published adventures and such, that is very much not the case, right? So in a lot of published D&D adventures, especially um, the big ones, right? The complete book ones that you find. Um, it is very much okay. Here's the fixed story, and here's a sequence of events that have to play out in this manner or in this order, right? And the players need to succeed here. They need to find this clue. They need to beat this person, and so on. And that is very much a plot driven narrative. And the players, sure, in the good ones, they actually get some choices. Like, do we go to this person first or that person first? But by the sheer nature of the product, right, you need to provide 15, 16, 17, 20 levels of adventure. That's a lot of adventure, right? An entire book's worth. You must make assumptions on how certain earlier events are going to go to make the latter events in the book possible or feasible or make sense in some way, right? Um, and that's just the nature of the beast in this one. So there are like parts where there's some very obvious railroading, better in some, worse in others. Um, and basically, the PCs or the players don't get to choose the direction of the narrative as a whole, right? They get to choose some things, but for the most part, they are along for the ride. And that's not what I want. I want to give the GM tools and to give the players opportunities to allow for a player driven narrative, right? And that includes things like, and again, this is more and more looking like it's going to be a thing, personal goals for the PCs, right? That is a very powerful one to have PCs or to have players say, well, my PC wants to accomplish this thing. So let's go do that. Let's go follow that. Right? Um like my PC wants to find a family heirloom. So I will go and I don't know, a magic sword that has been in my family for 30 generations and was stolen or lost in battle or something. And it's like, oh, there's a magic sword in this dungeon? Well, let's go into this dungeon and not into that one because I want to search for it. Right? Um, so That's what I mean with sandboxy, right? Player driven narrative is probably a better word. Um, and also to give the GM tools and systems to help create that, right? A lot of big games just leave the GM out to dry because they say, oh, this is how you run a game, right? Just you tell the players what the situation is, the players tell you what to do, and then you ask for a check, and then you continue. Rinse and repeat. Yes, that is very basically how you play an RPG. Um, but that doesn't give the GM a lot of tools and a lot of support in how to create adventures, how to craft ideas, how to engage the players, how to not have to worry about 10,000 things and think about 10,000 things all the time when playing the game, right? So this is often something very, very important. Uh, right, so GM tools on preparing and running the game. And that's another so that's something indie games have that quite a bit. And there are entire like blogs and books and zines and such that are all about how to do this, right? Giving the GM systems and tools to help make the game easier to run and to prepare very much. Um, Blades in the Dark is a very good one in this regard. Um, Other considerations. Uh, there was one I had just had in mind. Uh, then I talked about something else. um, oh, failing forward. Hey, Vanilla. Hi, thank you for the redeem. Oh, it works. Okay, so my redeems are back. Professor. I'm not a professor yet. Is it? Oh, wow, I think it's a bit messy, but thank you. My vanilla is my it's like how profitable, right? Okay, I'll take your word for it. But yeah, my VTuber brother. Hey, welcome back, Reconsist. So hold on. Did that work? That worked. Okay. Yeah, of course. So yeah, Vanilla is a blue baboon tarantula VTuber. Um so yeah, check him out. Really comfy vibes. As I was saying. um Failing forward. Okay, yes. Uh so what is failing forward? That is a concept that was developed with the rise of indie RPGs. And with the rise of indie RPGs, I mean like early 2000s, right? So 20 years ago. Um, and essentially, what you have in a lot of bigger games up to then is all results of checks and such are just binary, pass fail, right? It's either you do it or you don't do it, and that is a passable system, pun not intended. But it's not very interesting for one, and it kind of cuts off branches, right? Or closes doors. So when you it essentially makes the success the the expected result, and the fail is just a null result of nothing happens. And nothing happens is boring in a game, right? When you're playing and the GM just goes nothing happens, that is that is not very interesting. So it's like you're trying to pick a lock to get into a dungeon or into a castle or a warehouse or whatever. And the expected result to continue the adventure is that you make it, right? That you manage to pick the lock. And if you fail to pick the lock, nothing happens. You don't get to go in. That's it. You don't get to really continue on the adventure? Question mark, right? So that is a very boring result. And so the idea was made to introduce a concept called failing forward, or some people also prefer the term failing sideways for a slightly different thing. So what that means is that something will always happen, regardless if it's a success or a failure, right? So if you succeed in picking the lock, you get in, and then the adventure can continue. So something happens. If you fail to pick the lock, something else must also happen to continue the adventure in some way, right? To make the adventure exciting. So maybe failing to pick the lock means you get found by guards, or you trigger an alarm, or if you're cracking a safe, you don't manage to open the safe all the way. Maybe you manage to open it a crack, and then you see, oh no, there's a trap in there. And now you have to say, like, okay, what can I get through this crack in the safe door? But something must happen on a fail instead of just nothing happens. And that is failing forward. And failing forward is something that a good GM can do, even in a binary system, right? So Dungeons and Dragons is a binary system. On a success, you continue on your intended course. On a fail, nothing happens. The door is closed. You have to start finding ideas again, right? And it's this whole, you build up the tension. You're like, okay, what? Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do this idea. Maybe I can try this, and then get past it and proceed. And it's like, okay, that builds up excitement and tension. You roll, fail, nothing happens. Boom. Okay, and then you have to start from zero again and find new ideas. And that kills pacing and that kills excitement. A good GM can always make something fail forward on their own. But that requires the game to have a good GM. That means, as a designer, that you are lazy and you are foisting off, I think is the word, parts of your intended gameplay experience onto the GM. Right? If as a designer you say, "Oh, failing forward, yeah, that's a cool idea. That should definitely be in when you're playing an RPG. You should definitely have failing forward." But I'll just let the GM come up with things. I'm not going to include anything as a designer. That is lazy design. That is bad design, right? If you recognize a problem, if you recognize something that you could include, and say, "Oh yeah, this would be really good to have in the game," but the GM can take care of it, then you are failing your job as a designer. Because if a group doesn't have a good GM, maybe just a bad GM or a new GM, an experienced one, right, who doesn't know about failing forward as a concept, doesn't know how to use it properly, or isn't always quick on coming up with ideas for what could happen as an interesting consequence, then that thing does not exist in the game. Failing forward will not be in the game because you, as a designer, did not include it, and the GM doesn't have the experience or the desire or the will or whatever to include it. It's not in the game, right? So that is lazy design. Do not do lazy design, please. And this applies to anything, by the way. This applies to anything you want in the game. If like player character motivations, right? It's like, oh yeah, player characters having some sort of codified motivation or drive to go out on adventures is really, really cool, right? Should totally have that in the game. And then you don't put anything about it into the book and hope that the GM asks the players about it or that the players themselves are motivated enough to write down player character motivations, right? And if they don't, then that thing doesn't exist in the game. Lazy design. So don't do that. Failing forward is a thing. So I need a system to do that. And along with that system, I want uh, grades of success. So what I mean by that is not have a binary system of success fail, but have something in between as well. A partial success or success with a cost, right? That tends to make things interesting. A lot of indie games nowadays have that, right? They have on the one end, you can get a full success, or you can get a full failure with some sort of consequence, or you can get a mixed result, right? Where you get some of what you wanted, or you get what you wanted, but it comes at a cost. And that is very, very interesting. Um, and that also makes checks inherently dangerous, right? Failing forward and grades of success make checks inherently dangerous so that players are disincentivized to just throw dice and throw character stats at every problem, right? If if you have like I don't know a really high athletics modifier in D&D, for instance, you have a high strength and you have a magic item that gives you +2 to athletics or whatever, or you have a feat, and you basically have like, oh yeah, no, my athletics is at +12. I will basically make every single athletics check ever. Then whenever you have any problem that even slightly looks like it could be overcome with a judicious use of athletics, you just tell the GM, I throw my D20 at it. I'll throw my athletics skill at it. Done. Right? And that completely eliminates player creativity, and that is pure stat checking at this point, and consequence free stat checking at this point, mainly, which is a way to play, right? I'm not saying that's bad playing if people have fun with it, right? Because seeing number go up and seeing how powerful your character can be in fixed numbers is exciting, right? That's a lot of fun. And if you then get to exercise that power and say, look, my 5th level character has a +12 in athletics. I don't know if the math actually checks out, but whatever. Um, and and then players will go, oh yeah, I built my character this way and I totally get to use my character build and my strength that I've gathered over the last 2 months of playing, and it feels exciting to have a large number to throw at every problem. That can be a lot of fun. It's not the fun I'm going for in this game, right? So again, there's no wrong way to have fun. There are just different ways to have fun, and it's about what you want and what the group wants. So failing forward grades of success makes checks inherently dangerous. Um, and in addition to that, I want something. I don't know if there's a term for it, but I don't want one action, one check. Um, so I'm seeing the ad is coming soon. So I will see. Basically, one action equals one check would be something like D&D, right? You try one thing and then you check, and it's only this one tiny thing. Like I pick a lock. Okay, you pick a lock, and then you roll, and it's just this one action. Or I try to persuade someone, and it's basically you roll for this one sentence you just said to try and persuade someone. Or I try to push a boulder to clear a path. So you roll athletics, and it's just pushing this one boulder, or things like that, right? So one action, one check. It's very small scale, and I don't want that. I want a check to encompass more than just one action, right? It's particularly evident in combat. Like one action is one sword swing, or one check is one sword swing, for example. I don't want that. That's too minute, too many checks, and I don't know if there's a term for that, but that's what I want to keep in mind when designing the resolution system. Mm, and then while ads are playing,
Endure
I will think if
in
there's anything
enduring grow
else.
strong.
Mm, so let's see. I mean, I've already had some ideas for this game. Um, so I'm not designing this from zero right now. I've already had some ideas for this game before today. But I'm trying to see what I need to write down here, basically. Uh, keep in mind. I guess let me do this. All right, the ads should be over. So welcome back, everyone. As I was saying during that time, this is not a design from zero. I've played around with some ideas for this already before today. Um, so some other things I want in there is things like um, and these are things not things I need, but things I want more or less. So these are also things I want, but this is more very personal, um, very personal preferences. So no HP. This is a personal grudge against HP. Um, More than anything else because I think HP is it's a simple system and it can be interesting because it is definitely a form of attrition, right? You start out with say 10 HP and as you drop more and more, tension rises, right? If you're 10 HP, you're at a base level of tension and then you drop down to say 5 HP, then the tension goes up quite a bit. It's like, ooh, you can very clearly see how close you are to ending the adventure by dying, right? And then you drop down to 2 HP and then tension skyrockets like, oh no, what do I do now, right? So it is a way to generate tension, but it's not the only way to generate tension. It's not the only attrition system. And I think there are more interesting attrition systems um, and wound systems and injury systems and such. So what I want instead is a twofold system. So a system of, say, so a twofold system, something like endurance plus wounds, right? So what this is endurance is kind of like HP, but it recovers quickly, right? Scrapes and bruises and being out of breath. Whereas wounds are something more permanent, that really slow you down, really hinder you, and also can um can what's the word? Imitate? Not imitate. Indicate? I forgot. Oh man, I have so many problems trying to find words today. But basically, if you have, say, a broken arm, there is no way to have that in an HP system. And uh, if you break your arm, that is basically just the GM deciding, oh yeah, no, that attack that totally broke your arm. And there has to be a high degree of trust between the players and the GM for a GM to be able to do that, right? Uh, for the players to trust that this is not the GM being unfair or petty or evil or oppositional, and for the players to trust that the GM is doing this for the sake of story or for the sake of the narrative and immersion, and that the GM has to trust the players to go along with that and not cheat their way out of it because it's not written down anywhere. It's just something, a verbal agreement, and so on and so forth, right? And it can work if this trust exists. But again, if you want something like that in the game and you don't provide a system for it, you are once again just putting that off onto the playing group. That is lazy design. So I want a system for wounds, right? Things like broken arms or concussions or losing fingers or whatever, right? You could totally have that, because this is a deadly, dangerous world. Um, so if you have a system for that, a wound or injury system, then it is the system, the game, giving this to players, and you inherently trust the game when you decided to start playing it effectively, right? So that was already established. You are not dealing with a GM who is biased or who's possibly biased. You're dealing with a quote unquote neutral, well, yeah, hopefully neutral game system that just happened to give this to you. And um, yeah, and that's basically what this does. Um, and it adds to the attrition, right? It's like, oh yeah, losing some hit points, you can sleep that off, or you can drink a potion and heal. A broken arm? That's much tougher to deal with. Um, and I want. What other system did I want? This already ties into all that. Oh yeah, something else I want, and this is again a very personal preference. Only D6. It's not that I don't like other dice. Heck, D6 isn't even my favorite die. The D12 is. But I do believe that only having a single type of die is, on the one hand, it increases accessibility, especially if that die is the D6, because D6s are easier to get, right? You can buy them You could find them more often in different stores than other polyhedral dice. Heck, you can even buy something like Yahtzee or have an old set of Yahtzee or Monopoly sitting around, and boom, you have a couple of D6s, right? Um, so that makes it easier to access this game, and also it is a design constraint that forces me to be more creative in designing around it, and I enjoy that as a challenge. And I just think having only D6s means that players don't have to juggle different dice. Like if you look at a typical D&D session, very often, and this happens to players who have played a lot of times as well, they will mix up dice. There are a couple of dice that look very similar at first glance. The D20 and D12 look very similar. The D10 and D8 look very similar. Um, and then they will like check. It's like, oh, okay, what die do I roll for this check? Right. Or, oh, okay, so which one is it? And then they look through their pile of dice and it's like, is this a D20? No, that's a D12. Is this? No, that's not it. Right. And a lot of time is lost in players just kind of grabbing the correct die. Right. Or sometimes they roll and it's like, oh, wait, I was supposed to roll a D20. This is a D12. Okay, disregard that. I need to go find my D20 now. So you lose a lot of time and mental energy just by having all of these different types of dice in your game. Um, Having two types of dice can also work. There are many games that, for instance, have D20 and D6, um, or a D12 and a D6, or something like that. Dice or like percentage dice, or D10 and D6. So that can work because those dice are different enough that you can tell them apart more easily, and it's only two types of dice and not what's the basics? Seven types of dice? 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 20. Six types of dice. Six types of dice, right? That you have to go through. Very shiny, sparkly, different colored math rocks, and it's like, oh, which one do I have to pick out now? It's like looking for the correct color M&M in a huge pile of them. Um, so that's something I want in this game. Only D6. And I think it also streamlines the game somewhat because this forces me to go with very basic resolution systems that I can then apply to all of these different systems over here and to streamline, right? Again, if you learn how to make one check, you learn how to make all checks, essentially. And D6 is probably going to be a dice pool system, most likely, right? Instead of a single die system of some sort. Dice pool is a very broad term, right? Can encompass very different, many different things, but with D6, the range is not very big, so it's most likely going to be a dice pool system. Right. And that's all of the basic considerations and design goals down. So, OSR style, let me just write that down here. Right. Low powered fantasy adventure. The PCs are average people who explore the wilderness or delve into dungeons. World is dangerous. Cleverness trumps brute force. It's basically the guiding principle of OSR. Then you don't want the players to resort to combat right away. You want them to use their environment, use the tools and resources they have to cleverly overcome them, and to manage their resources, right? Look at, oh, how many torches did we bring? How many wounds can I still take? Right? And also things like, oh, my inventory is filling up. Do I want to take this golden statuette and sell it in town, or is it more important to hold on to, uh, I don't know, another two torches, right? What do I do here? So, uh, inventory management is important, right? A limited inventory so that players can't just buy everything for their characters and go into a dungeon with like 3 truckloads of tools and resources and be like, yeah, there's no problem. No, they can only carry what they can carry. They can only bring what they can carry and have to make do. Uh, okay. Yeah, so this personal goal thing for the PC seems to be definitely something. I'm also thinking about a background system, background generating system. Let's write that down here as well. System for backgrounds, PC backgrounds. Right. Um, which can help with coming up with a personal goal, but also help with establishing PC abilities to a certain degree or PC equipment to a certain degree. Starting equipment, right? Which is also very important. Um, it's going to be no classes in this game, I feel, because that kind of limits things more than I want them to. And no matter what kinds of classes you establish, there's always going to be a niche missing or something that you might want, would rather want, and so on. So no no classes. Hold on, I just damaged my stylus. Oh, 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 good job, me. Okay, there we go. Um, yeah. So this is going to be the design here is essentially going to be a very basic design for adventuring for the PCs, right? So let me add another layer. Hide this one. Hold on, no, I need to grab the colors first. Uh, then grab this color. Okay. All right. So the design here is going to be twofold, right? The first part of the design is that dot is messing with it. Part one is going to be the player characters, right? All the systems. What am I writing? Pertaining directly to the player characters. So things like, actually, let me write that in this color as well because that's still part of the title. Player characters, right? So all the things pertaining to them, things like stats, things like the core resolution mechanic, also pertains to the player characters for now. Things like background, things like inventory, how that works, the inventory management, things like the goal, right? The personal goal. Things like uh, health and damage, or health and injury, right? So all of these systems that are directly tied to player characters. And then the second part, let me put this below. Part 2 is I'll call them adventuring systems. Right, all the various mechanical systems that are there for the players to use, for the GM to use to help with adventuring. So, dungeon crawling, wilderness travel, what else do we have? We had downtime, maybe something like crafting and repairing, right? Come on. Strongholds is a possible one as well. And as some games demonstrated, you can go very small. You can go into things like uh, traps can be their own system, right? How to deal with traps, for example, um, or social systems. You can have that as well. This is an entire topic that can fill 10 videos on its own, right? Systems for social encounters and such. I'm not going to go into it here. I'm just going to say I'm going to make one or more, depending on what we need. Um, Things like, of course, combat, right? That's also going to be a system. And I have said that combat is not something players want their characters to do, right? They don't want to fight. They want to avoid it as much as possible. So combat, in this case, is an example of negative design space, or negative design in general. Essentially, you design a system and design it in such a way that players don't want to interact with it. That sounds very counterintuitive when you first think about it. But what you can do is, for example, fall damage could be said to be a negative design. Right. Fall damage is if you fall a certain amount of height, you will take such massive damage that your character is guaranteed to die. Even if you don't fall a massive amount, you still take a lot of damage, and your character is likely to be incapacitated or barely able to function afterwards. So, fall damage, the system of fall damage, means that players are not going to randomly jump off all sorts of ledges that they find. It seems really dumb when you say it out loud. It's like, duh, who would want to jump off random ledges all the time, right? But the reason players don't do that, or the reason players don't have their characters do that, is because of the mechanic of fall damage. Right? If fall damage didn't exist, players would be much more incentivized to just jump down places all the time, or to make risky jumps in general, right? Um, because there are no consequences for doing it, for engaging in this activity. So combat in this game is going to be similar. Combat is going to be so deadly and so dangerous that players will think 4, 5, 6 times before saying, okay, let's fight. Right? So combat in the system is the fall damage of most other systems, basically. Um, right? You have it in there so that players don't do it because they can very clearly, mechanically codified, see the consequences of engaging in this activity. Um, but yeah, so this is basically also various GM systems of like prepping, right? Prepping and running plus running. Like having these systems already makes it easier. Like if there's a clear dungeon crawling system, that that eases the mental load of the GM quite a bit because the GM can just follow the system and the dungeon runs itself in a way, right? And anything to help lighten the load of a GM. Anyone who's ever GM'd for some amount of time will know just how tiring it is keeping in mind everything. So having a game that runs certain things by itself is a big relief. And that's the idea. Okay, so the important part is part one. Right? Part one is the important bit here, because that is the core, and all the other systems kind of revolve around this core of the player characters. So let's start defining. That line is very crooked. This line is better. So let's start defining some things about the characters. I will start with some of the systemic things. Ironically, you don't need to start with, or not ironically, but interestingly, you don't need to start with stats. Maybe ironically, because when players look at characters in games, new games, they first look at the stats. It's like, oh, what stats do I have? How is my character built up? What can I do? Right? And stats are very much front and center in a lot of games and in a lot of character sheets and such, right? If you look at Dungeons and Dragons, like everyone knows the 6 stats, right? You can list them off: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. It's like everyone knows them and they are front and center, and everything else revolves around them. But interestingly, you don't have to define these stats first. In fact, it's sometimes better if you don't, because you should first look at, all right, what kinds of things are there that can be influenced by stats? And then what kind of stats do I need to make characters interesting enough that, say, not a single stat overshadows everything else? Um, like there are a bunch of games, especially old games and video games as well. That happens a lot in video games, where you have a single stat that overshadows everything else. Um, like I was recently reading the uh the manual, or the transcribed text of the manual of the first Elder Scrolls game, Arena. And the manual very explicitly says, like, there are 8 stats every character has. The manual very explicitly says agility is the most important stat. Put all your points into agility. Or things like personality. And it's like, oh, personality only influences your buying and selling prices, nothing else. And buying and selling prices are also influenced by intelligence and willpower, which are also important stats. So it's like, okay, so I will put 0 points into personality. Right? So that's like, that's very unbalanced. And you use the same points to improve those stats, well, of course, the points 1 point into agility is way more valuable than 1 point into personality, right? So to prevent this uneven distribution of power among what should be equals, you can first look at, all right, what is influenced by stats? What are the systems? And then you can define your stats so that every stat is more or less equal, right? Because having unequal stats removes player choice. Right? It's like put all my stats in agility, screw with personality. So you don't have a choice here. Right, ads starting soon again. Um, but I definitely recommend looking through many older games like that as well. Like in general, if you want to design games, play lots of games. That is the biggest advice I can give. That's the biggest advice many other designers will give. If you want to start designing games, you want to get better at designing games, play lots of games. That's that's just how you get exposed to very different systems.
In enduring, grow
Uh,
strong.
and learn about good design and bad design, right? In the form of live case studies and live examples. Um, and how to improve your own design, and also systems and mechanics that you can steal. Um, hold on. Oh, okay. But yeah, play more games, and not just role playing games. Like if you want to design role playing games, don't just play role playing games. Even though yes, play lots of role playing games, right? But there are so many other games, board games, card games, other tabletop games, miniature war games. Heck, D&D started out as a small party skirmish version of a miniature war game, right? Chainmail. Um, look at video games, all sorts of different video games. Look at sports. Look at mobile games, right? Look at all sorts of different things and see how they do things. And look at what kind of systems there might be. Look at get inspiration from lots of different games, right? So yeah, play more games. Biggest piece of advice, like all of this that I'm doing right now, yes, it's helpful, but the biggest thing, play more games. If you can't play them, read them, watch them, right? Whatever. Just engage with games in general if you want to design them. Um, and maybe you will find something that you really, really enjoy. Like I've found a lot of really cool games just by intentionally playing many games, even games that I personally thought I'm not going to enjoy this, right? I still played a session of them or so just to see what the design is like, right? Just so I can see, well, will I actually not enjoy this or not? Maybe it's okay. Maybe I'll have fun. Maybe not, right? Never know, but at the very least, I will have learned something. Um, all right. So, like I was saying, stats are important, but designing stats is something that comes later in the process. So the core resolution mechanic here is pretty important, and also because managing your inventory, managing health and injury, and such, the whole attrition system is also really, really important. That needs to come first as well. So this is where the part comes in where I've already had some thoughts on how to do this. And again, this is not new. Other games have done this before me. A game called The One Ring has done this. A game called Knave second edition, which is coming out soon, is doing this or something similar to it. A game called Endurance RPG did this as well. Like a lot of different games have done this already. So essentially, the idea here is you have an endurance score. Whoops. Right, so let me use this color. So the idea is you have an endurance score. And again, the exact names can change, right? What I call this now, this is just a working title, essentially, a working label. If I change this later to something that fits the theme better or that is more snappy or whatever, doesn't matter. Names you can leave until the very end, right? So you have some sort of endurance score. And this endurance score is used for various things. So the endurance score is item slots. So I want a slot-based inventory system, meaning every item that you pick up occupies one slot. Maybe, right? Some games have it so that certain small or crucial items you can package into like 3 in a slot or something like that, like rations or torches. The game Mausritter does that. Other games are very stringent. Like Cairn, for example, that uses a similar system and says, no, every item is one slot. You have, say, 10 item slots or 12 item slots. If you want to carry 2 torches, that's 2 item slots. So every single one matters, right? If you want a weapon, a sword, that is 1 item slot. If you want armor, that is 1 item slot. If you want a water skin, that is 1 item slot. If you want rations, 2 portions of rations, that's 2 item slots. Oh, look, you've already filled like 7 item slots out of your 10. Good luck, right? So, but even if you can group some items together, that's still a very limited amount. That's just playing around with some numbers, right? Do you want to bring a repair kit for your armor? Well, that's another item slot. So, and that really makes items and inventory a very crucial part where players really have to think carefully, okay, what exactly do I want to bring? How much do I want to bring? And I need some item slots left over for treasure because, oh, you found a small bag of gold pieces? Well, guess what? That's an item slot. Oh, you're out of item slots? Well, what do you favor more, that bag of gold or a ration? Your choice, right? And that creates interesting choices. And so item slots are a very quick and easy and dirty system to really make this work. They are, of course, heavily abstracted. Like, what do you mean? Armor and a torch both take up 1 item slot. Don't think about it too much, right? This is the game portion of the game, right? And heck, a lot of video games work the exact same way. And no one complains. But as soon as you go into a tabletop game, people are like, but realism. Realism is not always the highest design goal. It shouldn't always be the highest design goal. You need to know what you're doing. And if you're designing a system, every system you design is by necessity an abstraction of reality. So don't sweat it. Don't sweat realism. Design fun systems that give players interesting and meaningful choices. Right? Players who cry, but my realism, well, okay, then they can play a different game that they can go play Shadowrun or something, right? That tries to emulate reality, or at least the reality of the setting, much closer. Or they can go play GURPS or something else, right? But then this game is just not for them, and that's okay. You can't please everyone. Just make sure you are designing something that has a clear design goal and then stick to it. So, item slots are
an abstraction, but an abstraction I am willing to accept because it creates fun, meaningful choices. But your endurance score is also your hit points. And already we can see, oh, if you lose hit points, that means your maximum number of item slots goes down. So you really don't want to get hurt. Or if you do get hurt, now you have to decide what to keep and what to drop. Right? If you start out with 12 endurance, that means you can carry 12 items. And then you get hit by something and you lose 3 endurance. Well, guess what? You have to let go of 3 items if you were at capacity before that, right? So that's the pressure of adventuring, right? Now, hit points, I will put this in quotation marks, because they will heal, or maybe not, right? But hit points, they can heal pretty quickly, right? Usually a rest, catching your breath or so, or resting for a bit, can put your endurance score back, right? You regain endurance. That's okay. But also, we wanted a wound system. So, item slots are used for actual items and gear, but item slots are also used for injuries. So, if you get an injury somehow, you have to write down that injury into your item slots, and it occupies 1 slot. So, the more injuries you have, I mean, they will probably impair you in other ways, of course. If you have a broken arm, you cannot swing a 2-handed sword. Things like that. But also, they impair your ability to carry things. Right? So all of this will tie together into this endurance score. Right? And the more systems you tie together into one stat or one role or one whatever, the more important that thing becomes. And the more players will pay attention to it. Right? Makes sense, I hope. Right? If everything in the game revolves around endurance, or a lot of important systems revolve around endurance, then players are going to really pay attention to endurance. Right? So that's the main idea here. And then the core resolution mechanic, I don't know. There might be a way to tie endurance into the core resolution mechanic as well. And that is, the core resolution mechanic is some sort of D6 die pool. Right? Or dice pool. And the endurance score, because it is a pool of points that goes up and down by being hit points, it's not too far-fetched to think, well, maybe you can intentionally spend a point of endurance to get a better chance when making a roll. Right? So maybe spending a point of endurance allows you to re-roll, or it increases your chances before a roll or so, right? So I can have this over here and say spend to increase chances. So maybe in a dice pool system, depending on how many dice you have, you can say you spend 1 point of endurance to get an extra die, or an extra 2 dice or so, right? Depending on how impactful that will be in your current system. Or the reroll is a very classic one. You roll and it's like, I don't really like this result. I will spend a point of endurance to reroll it. Right? And it's a very easy thing to understand, and a very easy thing to implement. But suddenly you're tying the core resolution mechanic again to the endurance score. And suddenly this endurance score becomes the main thing every player worries about. This becomes the centerpiece of a character, and the stats become secondary. Right? In D&D, D&D actually functions similarly. In D&D, yes, the stats are front and center in the character sheet and such, but the main mechanic, the core mechanic that everything in the game revolves around is hit points. It's a bit flawed because of the reasons I've said earlier of things like, oh, resting for 8 hours recovers all of your hit points, and you can rest 8 hours whenever. So hit points don't actually mean that much by virtue of how some other systems tie into it. But basically, every system in the game, weapon damage, spells to reduce or increase hit points, character abilities to deal more damage or attacks more times or whatever, right? Resting, even death and dying, all of these various systems, leveling up, you gain more hit points, right? And you gain more ways to reduce enemy hit points or to recover your own hit points, etc., 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 etc. All of these systems tie into the core mechanic of hit points. It's just that some of the systems undo what a lot of the other systems are doing. But yeah, so, and now you can see, well, okay, stats, there's no need to define them now. I just need to define what they do. How do stats interact with endurance and or core resolution mechanic? But I don't need to say anything more about that. I don't need to say how many I have. I don't need to say what they are. I don't need to well, depending on how they tie into the core resolution mechanic, it gives me an idea of the range of numbers the stats will have, like the values the stats will have, and so on. But that is all secondary, right? And the core resolution mechanic, this is where you will have to test. This is where you can have a lot of different possibilities. And there are a lot of different ones that you can take from other games or get inspired by from other games. And we already have some guidelines. So we have 3 base results, right? Full success. That's a horrible U. Right? Partial success. Oh my goodness, I cannot write. Or success. So, oh my goodness, what am I writing? With cost and failure with consequences. And these consequences are what produces the fail forward, right? And these costs, with success with cost, are the consequences, right? What's the difference between partial success and success with cost? Partial success is just you only get part of what you want. Success with cost, at least this is how I define it. Success with cost is you get fully what you want, but it comes at a cost. And some games mix these two. Some games only have one of these two. Some games let you choose. Some games don't even differentiate, right? They just use these terms interchangeably. This is playing with definitions. You do what you want as long as you are clear what you're doing. So in my case, I'm more likely going to skew towards success with cost because that is the more interesting one in my eyes. Right. So I need a core resolution mechanic that creates these three results somehow. There are many such mechanics, right? And then it's just choosing one that you like and choosing one that you can work with for your system. And choosing one that I like is the difficult one. So, for instance, there's a Powered by the Apocalypse one, the Apocalypse World, which is you roll 2d6. So let me just put some examples for resolution systems here. So CRM examples. This is also something I'm really bad at. Something I personally need to work on for my designs, and that is choosing and picking a specific core resolution mechanic. I'm never happy with them because it's always I can make it better, I can fix it, I can do better, and then my games never get finished. um, Apocalypse World. And many other Powered by the Apocalypse games do this, even though Vincent Baker, the designer of Apocalypse World, said that that is not core to the game. Right? Other things are core to the idea of Powered by the Apocalypse. It's just that he picked this particular system for Apocalypse World, and everyone said, "Hey, this is a good system," and started copying it. And now it's become core to Powered by the Apocalypse games. Unintended, but why fix something that's not broken? Why break something that works? I don't know what the saying is. Anyway, so how this works is you roll 2d6, and then on a 10 plus is a success. Hold on, this is a lot of right, and then 10 plus is success. Oh, hey peeps! Hello, thank you for the hydrate, and welcome. How are you doing? Of drinking a lot of tea today. Let me give you a shout out as well. So Peeps also really comfy streamer. Plays lots of fighting games. So I learned a lot about fighting games watching Peeps. So yeah, definitely a very good resource. Been lurking and peeping in since the beginning. Oh, thank you then. Thank you for being here all this time. Always nice to have you. Doing okay, just taking it slow and steady? Yeah, I feel that. But taking it slow and steady is nice. It's good to do. Where was I? Hope you're well, or brainy designer. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Yeah, I am doing. I'm doing quite well, I guess. I'm having fun with this, and I hope everyone else is having fun and hopefully learning something as well. Lots of interesting things, hopefully, going on. Where was I? Apocalypse World. So, roll 2d6. 10 plus is a full success. 7 to 9 is the partial. And a 6 minus is a fail. Right? And how it defines what a partial is and what consequences are, that's in the system. Not interesting for us right now. We're just looking at how throw math rock, right? How to read the math rocks, the clicky clacks. And so that's the Apocalypse World system. Then there is the Blades in the Dark system. Blades in the Dark. So Blades in the Dark uses a pool of d6. right? So pool of d6, check the highest that you roll. So you roll a bunch of d6, anywhere from 1 to maybe 5 or 6, right? So you roll typically 2 or 3. That's the average for characters, right? And you check the single highest one that you've rolled, and then on if the highest die that you've rolled is a 6, right? That is a success. A 4 or 5 is a partial, and a 1, 2, 3 is a fail. And it technically also has a 2 or more. 6 is a crit, right? But that's like outside the main system for now. So as you can see, this is unevenly distributed, right? Getting a success, I mean, sure, getting some sort of success is 50% chance, but most of your successes are going to come with some cost. This is intentional, right? And this you can skew. Same here, right? Because this is 2d6, it's slightly more than 50%. It's 50. Oh my goodness, what is well, I should know this. This is basic game design probability, right? What are the chances of a 2d6? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 12, 15. 15 over 36. So 15 over 36, you get a fail, and 21 over 36, you get some form of success. So you can see this is actually quite good. But most of this is going to be the partial successes, right? And how do stats influence this? This is the thing we're looking for. Stats give flat bonus. So, if you have a stat of 1, you just add +1 to this 2d6. If you have a stat of 2, you add +2 to this 2d6. And that, as you can see, shifts the probability of getting these results, right? If you get a +2 on your rolls on a 2d6, it's much more likely that you'll get a 10 plus than it is to get a 6 minus, 6 or less, right? So that's what the stats do. In this game, stats determine, oops, I can no longer write, size of the pool. So if you have a stat of 1, you roll 1d6. If you have a stat of 3, you roll 3d6. And then you check the highest. So again, you can see the higher your stat, the higher the chance of getting a good success, right? Or a success in general. In fact, once you roll 6 dice, you have a 52% chance of getting at least 1/6. So that's really good. What other systems are there? There are more linear systems that people try to adapt, like D&D and its ilk kind of have something like that, in the sense that when you roll a 20 on a combat check, you crit. When you roll a 1 on a combat check, I don't know if that's still a rule or if that's a house rule or so, you critically fail. That is, in a way, gradated success. And you can also say if you hit your difficulty exactly, that is a partial success. And if you go over, that's a full success. If you go under, that's a fail. That is possible to do, but that feels very much like a band-aid. And it's on a D20, if only a single number gives you a partial success, that's a 5% chance of getting that result. And that relegates it to unlikely, and most checks are going to be uninteresting. If you look at these, right, the partial has the highest chance of appearing, right, just by virtue of the 2d6 distribution. Here as well, once you go into 2 dice, the partial has the highest chance of appearing, right? So just by using probability, you can manipulate how the game is going to flow. So yes, if you are going to design dice systems, learn statistics and probability. That is something you, at the very least, to see what is possible. You don't have to be like me and actually look at lectures of statistics and probability and go huge tables and calculate things and big formulas and such. You don't have to do that, right? I'm a nerd. But it helps to know what probability is capable of and how to manipulate it so that you get the kinds of results that you want. So, pop quiz. What's the difference between D&D and tossing a coin?
Enduring, grow strong.
All right, rolling a d20 and D&D and tossing a coin. What's the difference? So I'll give you the ad time to think about that while I drink some more of my tea. Been talking a lot. I need to drink. Stretch a little bit. I think I slept wrong. When I woke up, like the right side of my back is like, ooh, it's like someone put a rebar into my back. And it's like if I move badly, it hurts. So I must have, I don't know, lain weirdly or just slept wrong to have that. And that's hopefully it'll go away over the day. If I don't know, do a bit of stretching or so. But yeah, it's a bit painful. My back is completely broken. Like I need to take care of it some more, but it's so difficult. My back is weak, so training it is difficult, but I need to get it stronger to train it. Blah, it's a devil's it's a what do you call it? It's a death cycle. Right. So ads should be done. All right. So pop quiz question is: what is different between rolling a d20 in D&D and a coin flip? What's the difference? And the only difference is that in D&D, it's weighted. That's it. D&D essentially uses a coin flip, right? And the only thing you're doing is you're weighting the coin. So that's why a lot of these systems of adjusting the coin flip to kind of have this in there is a band-aid solution more often than not, right? So I don't want to look at solutions like that. I am sure there are other systems that will generate this kind of 3-result outcome. There is a Powered by the Apocalypse game called Ironsworn. I think it's called Ironsworn. That has a rather complex resolution system where you roll first to establish the difficulty, and then you roll something else to establish if you succeed or not. But the more dice rolls you have, you have to be very careful. The more dice you roll and the more individual steps you have in rolling and reading the dice takes a lot of time, or can take a lot of time. The slower your game gets, right, the more it slows the game down, and the more muddled the probabilities get. Right? The more dice and rolls you include, the wilder the probability becomes and the more unpredictable things get. That might be what you want. Maybe you want a really chaotic system, right? But you have to watch out. There is it is possible to completely break your system by having a wrong arrangement of rolls. For example, if you say, okay, first you roll a d20 to establish the difficulty, and then you roll another d20 and you have to meet or beat the first one to see if you succeed. Yes, that makes the roll very chaotic, but overall, that means that every single action has a 55% chance of succeeding. Every single one. Because the two d20s cancel each other out. Like that. Right? So that is also how understanding probability will help, so that you don't design traps like that. It's like, oh, you roll first to determine difficulty, then roll to beat that difficulty. Well, congratulations. Every roll now has the same probability to succeed or not. Maybe that's what you want, but then you might as well just fix a number and just roll, right? Just say 10 or higher, you succeed, done, and then you just roll and you save yourself the first roll. So yeah, that's something to be careful about. Now, both of these systems here, and these are not the only systems I can use. I can also create my own, but these are tested, right? Both of these systems work in the sense that they produce these three results, and they have a very easy way of stats to influence things, right? So stats in this case can just be the flat number, and the flat number immediately determines how they influence the roll, right? Here, a stat of +2 just means +2 to the roll. Here, a stat of 2 means 2 dice. Done. And I cannot decide. Cannot decide. Maybe I want a third option. Maybe I want to design my own thing. I don't know. So I'm not going to decide right now. I'm just not. I don't have to right this moment. And also, like, deciding on a resolution mechanic is mostly doing a lot of what ifs and probabilities and going through like personal preferences and just toying around with ideas, and that's not exciting, I guess. And at some point it's also just taking out dice and just rolling a bunch and seeing what feels better. And trying not to overcomplicate things. But these are also simple in the way that you can have other bonuses apply, right? Now, so like if you have a situation that gives you some bonus, you just get another +1, or you just get another die. Very importantly, though, neither of these take into account the task itself. If you think about it, games like D&D and such, when you are checking your stat, you are checking it against a difficulty determined by the GM, which in turn is determined by the task and the environment that you're doing, right? So jumping over ledge A might be a DC, a difficulty class of 10. Jumping over ledge B might be a difficulty class of 18, right? Because the ledges are wider or not. Or maybe you can get a running start or not, whatever. But every task has its own difficulty score. That is not the case here. Here, you are testing against a rigid a rigid system, not a rigid range of results that doesn't change, right? So whether you are jumping over this ledge or that ledge, you always roll the 2d6 or you always roll a certain number of d6 and you will always check against these numbers. That doesn't change. Again, abstraction and fun systems. This kind of thing means the GM doesn't have to worry about, is this thing difficult or not? Right? Is this task A slightly more difficult than task B? And a lot of difficulties are very arbitrary and not impactful. Right? Like, what's really the difference between, say, a difficulty of 17 or 18? Not much, to be honest. Right? It's a 5% difference. But if the character has a plus 12 on their roll, that 5% doesn't do much in any case, right? They have a high percent of succeeding anyway. So you can say, all right, so we don't have to worry about that. There are systems that do take that into account. Fate, for instance, Fate Core has a system. Whoops. So Fate Core also has this triple result. Is this wrong? Did I? Okay, I somehow ended up on that layer. I don't know how. So Fate Core, and I'm not going to use this system, but just as for illustration purposes and for completeness. So Fate Core, you roll 4d F. Now, these are fate dice or fudge dice, and they basically have three possible results, all with an equal chance: a plus, a 0, or a minus. And what you do is you take your skill, right? Plus roll. Oh my goodness, what the heck? Roll, not rule. And then compare to difficulty. So you might have a skill of, say, +2 on something, and the difficulty of a roll might be 3. Then you roll this, and then you must get at least a +1. So you roll 4 of them, so every plus and every minus cancels out. So a roll of, say, plus, 0, minus, right, is +1. A roll of 0, 0, minus, minus would be a -2, right? And so there are different combinations you can get, and then you compare that to the difficulty. And how this works is higher than difficulty, I'm just going to write DC for short, is a success. Equal to difficulty is a partial. And less than difficulty is a fail. Right? So the difficulty takes the roll of these numbers here, the 1 to 3, 4, 5, 6, or the 6 minus 7 to 9, 10 plus, right? That's the difficulty. And because the scale of fate is very non-granular, right? And D&D, for instance, you have 20 numbers or even more. Can theoretically, I think the game allows up to 30, right? So you have a range of 30. In Fate, you only have a range of something like -2 to +6. That's a range of 9 because you have to count the 0 as well, right? So that's less than half. So at this point, you can say, all right, having an equal, this has a decent chance of appearing. So the partial success has a decent chance of appearing. And this is how you can have a difficulty, an outside difficulty, and a character stat or trait and the roll and still have this triple result. Right? They also have, if you have 2 or more, then it's a crit, or 2 or less or something, that's an extra fail or so. But again, these are dressing on the side. This is another system, but it requires the fudge dice, right? And it does require the GM to constantly adjudicate difficulties, and that is something. It's a mental task for the GM, and again, if you don't have to do that, it becomes easier to run. And in fact, Blades in the Dark does something very interesting, and the more I'm talking about this, the more I'm leaning to this system. So Blades in the Dark, before you roll, you first set out 2 things. You set out your position, right? So the position can be, what are the terms used? It can be risky, desperate, or I forgot what the last position is called. Not safe. Controlled. There we go. Controlled. So controlled, risky, or desperate. And this is all narrative, right? So the player says, I would like to do this. And then the GM and player negotiate, and the GM says, okay, but if you do this, that is a really desperate action here, right? It's like, oh, you are surrounded by 5 people with their weapons drawn. And then the player might go, all right, I charge the one in front of me, take him by surprise, and try to stab him before they attack me. And then GM goes, okay, that's really, really desperate what you're doing right there. Okay, so you're in a desperate position. Or something like, yeah, there's this person. I want to sneak through this courtyard past the guards, and I'm gonna take my time, right? I'm gonna sneak halfway first, and then hide in the columns, and then observe again. And the GM can say, okay, so you're taking your time, you're doing this in a controlled manner. That's a controlled position. So the position determines the consequences that you will face when you get consequences. So on a fail or partial, and then you have your effect, which is great, standard, or limited. And this determines the effect, what you gain, the reward, I guess, for the action, for lack of a better term. Right? So it's like, okay, you're trying to sneak past this courtyard. You could make it in one go, right? So standard effect, that's what you wanted, right? Sneak through the entire courtyard, but that's a risky position. Or you can take your time, right? But then you would have to stop halfway to reassess your situation and let some guards pass. So you get into a controlled position, but you have a limited effect. And so on and so forth. And you start to negotiate. And this is where the difficulty, so to speak, comes in. And this is a really cool system, right? Where you first, and it does a very important thing. Before you roll, you first establish what are the consequences and what are the rewards that you get. And if you cannot establish these things, you do not roll. You just do it. Right? And essentially, because a lot of times, a lot of games say, "Oh, only roll if the roll can be interesting." Even D&D says that, and many other games say that. Only roll if the roll is interesting. If failure could be interesting, if success is not secured, right, is not ensured, then you roll. But many times people just roll, and then afterwards they go, "Oh, well, nothing happens." So failure is not interesting, right? And success wasn't necessarily on the line and things like that. So you get a lot of these dead rolls that just slow down the game and don't contribute anything because they don't make the game more interesting. Perception is a big offender. So in this system, you first determine the consequences and the rewards, and then you roll. Right? And then you check, okay, what of these apply? If you get a success, you get your reward. If you get a partial, you get both. If you fail, you only get the consequences. So I'm thinking this system is not bad. And the whole dice pool thing is like you can play around with it, right? You can increase or decrease the size of the pool to mimic certain effects, like injuries. Blades in the Dark does this. If you have certain injuries, the amount of dice you get in your pool gets reduced. Tying back to this up here, injuries, right? So more and more, I think I'm just going to lift the Blades in the Dark system. Okay, so talking about it made me pick one. Okay, cool. So we got a system. We're using Blades in the Dark. Blades in the Dark system. Nice. Okay. I'm not going to go into the adventuring systems today because these are pretty big. And I've been going for 3.5 hours. Instead, I'm going to look at the background personal goal thing. So, very quickly, background. I want some sort of background creation system. Something to help guide the players through the process of creating their character through their background. This ensures several things. This ensures that the characters will have some background that ties them to the world and the setting and the story. It gives the GM something to work with by depending on how you tune and create the system of background creation, you can ensure that there are entries in there there are results that are being generated which automatically give the GM something to work with and give the player something to work with, right? The background can also include the whole player goal thing, either by giving some powerful prompts or by just having that as one of the steps in creating the background. So, Peeps ran a game where I was a player called Burning Wheel, where it had something like that, right? Called the Character Burner, where you go through a pretty extensive system of determining years of your life, of the character's life. So from birth to age 7, the character was a villager. Okay, so you get these and the skills to go with it. And then later on, they were drafted into the military or something. Okay, so from age 7 is a bit young, but maybe later on as a teenager, age 14 to 15 or 16, they were in the military, right? And then they get these and the skills to match, and so on and so forth. And then you build a character backstory that then also gives you ties to the world that makes your character lived in, and immediately gives you something to work with. Now, the burning wheel system might be a bit too extensive, too big, for what I'm going for. But some sort of system, right? System to generate backstory, right? And it needs to provide character stats plus equipment. Oops. Plus traits plus relationships. Relationships are, again, something criminally underutilized, right? Relationships to other PCs, relationships to NPCs, relationships to organizations, and so on. If you can have that in the game, that is really, really good and gives the GM and the players a lot to work with. So, some sort of system, and give prompts for, oops, this is horrible handwriting, for personal goal, right? Depending on the events that the character lived through, the player can then look at that and go, okay, so my character probably wants to achieve this, right? That helps in coming up with ideas. And give GM material to tie PCs to the narrative and setting. Right? If the PC grew up in a certain town, then maybe the characters will visit that town and the PC can be like, oh, I know this place like the back of my hand. Or if the PC set up a rival or an enemy organization or whatever, then those people can pop up and become integral to the story. And that makes the players much more engaged because it's not just random evil organization number 322, but it's, oh, this particular organization, the, I don't know, the Red Hand or whatever that my character has dealt with all their life, or that had a really impactful event in my character's backstory. So now I established this organization, and now they are in the game. They pop up again. I'm invested. Right? That's the idea. So not as extensive as something like Burning Wheel, but some sort of system to generate a backstory. Okay. And again, what stats I use, how they work. I mean, how they work, we kind of got that. But which stats I use, how many there are, etc., that is for later. That can be done at the very end once these systems are also clearer. And I can say, oh, okay, I need a stat to apply to these kind of situations in the systems, or this stat is actually pretty useless in the game. I can just get rid of it and such, right? But that's when I have more of the mechanics down. Okay. I would say that this is quite a bit already. So we started out with an OSR kind of system, right? That deals heavily in inventory management, but also has the whole character personality and personal goal thing in there, where background is important, right? That's not in all OSR games, but I like that aspect of the characters. They're not just pawns that you push around a board. They are given some sort of personality in the system, not just by the players, but in the system. It gives you ways to generate that and make sure it's in the game and make it important in the game somehow. And like, for instance, playing to your personal goal could recharge endurance. right? Because you draw willpower and you draw inspiration from fulfilling your personal goal or pursuing your personal goal, and that gives you the strength to carry on, tying it again to the core mechanic of the entire thing, right? So, recharged by pursuing goal. That is one way to recharge endurance. Boom. And then we tie that in, right? And you really want to get endurance because that's important. And yeah, we actually also decided on a core resolution mechanic, which is not easy, but we did it. And yeah. So next time we can start looking at some of these systems here. Some more relevant ones, dungeon crawl is a big one, wilderness travel, downtime, right? Those are a couple of big ones. Establish some ways to play them, and then see how to tie them into the core resolution mechanic and such, right? And into the endurance score and all of that fun stuff. All right. Huh, not bad. All right. I hope this was interesting. I hope you learned some things about how to design RPGs, what goes into RPGs. And if you want to design some systems of your own when playing, right? Maybe your players really like harvesting monster parts and doing alchemy with them. Well, okay, so how do you design an alchemy system for that? Right? And designing a subsystem goes through many of the same steps. You just establish a design goal. You go through, okay, how do I make sure the mechanics support this design goal? How do I make sure the players will have fun? How do I make sure they get meaningful choices that contribute toward what the fiction is trying to tell, right? And all of that good stuff. So even a subsystem like this follows many of the same steps, right? So if you want to design things like that for your homebrew, etc., following these kind of steps will get you to results as well. And again, play more games. Okay. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this and found it interesting and maybe even a bit educational. We'll hopefully continue this the next week and then continue continue designing this. All right. Let's see, where do we go? I think I know where we're gonna go. Yeah. All right, let's go raid the Last Seahorse. The Last Seahorse is doing a charity stream for Trans Lifeline. And Seahorse in general, really cool streamer, pretty chill. Plays a lot of retro games, and it looks like is currently playing Castlevania with a Guitar Hero controller. Okay. So let's go check in on that. Right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This was a lot of fun. I will continue this next week. In the weekend, Saturday, my time, I will play some more Baldur's Gate. Right. So back to role-playing games. And then on Sunday, we will have V Rising, possibly. We're close to the end of V Rising, so not sure how much longer that will go. But yeah. So thank you for coming by. I wish you a very good time zone, good day, evening, wherever you are. Take care and bye-bye.